Welcome to Libeth. Today we begin something unusual. Most books about combat teach you how to move your body. This one teaches you how to move your mind, or rather, how to stop moving it in the wrong direction. The Unfettered Mind was written in the early 17th century by a Zen Buddhist monk named Takuan Sōhō. He was not a fighter. He had never, as far as we know, held a sword in serious combat. And yet the text he produced is considered one of the most important documents in the entire history of Japanese martial philosophy. The man he wrote it for, Yagyū Munenori, was probably the most lethal swordsman alive in Japan at the time. Official instructor to the shogun. Head of a lineage of warriors that stretched back through generations of civil war. A man whose technical mastery of the blade was simply not in question. And what Takuan wrote to him, essentially, was this: your mind is broken. Not your technique. Your mind. That's where the problem lives, and that's where you have to go looking. The text is structured as 3 letters. Not a treatise, not a manual, letters. The intimacy of that form matters enormously. Takuan isn't lecturing from a distance or constructing a doctrine for posterity. He's writing to someone specific, someone whose situation he understands from the inside, someone who has already gone as far as technique can take a person and is standing at the edge of what technique can answer. That relationship between a monk who never fought and a warrior who had fought his entire life is itself the argument. It says that the problem Takuan is addressing is not a problem that martial training produces a solution to. It is a problem that martial training, pursued far enough and honestly enough, inevitably reveals. The text exists because a man at the absolute limit of physical mastery found something on the other side of that limit that he needed a different kind of help to understand. What this series does is move slowly through every dimension of this text and the world it came from. We'll spend time on the historical and social context, the specific pressures of early Edo Japan that made these questions urgent in a way they hadn't been before, that produced a warrior class with no war to fight, and a Zen establishment being absorbed into state administration. 2 institutions discovering simultaneously that their function had been redefined beneath them. Then we'll move into the text itself, its structure, its architecture, the specific logic of how 3 letters build an argument that never states its conclusion directly, because stating it directly would defeat the purpose. We'll look at the figures who populate the text. The monk author whose authority rests entirely on clarity rather than force. The swordsman recipient who is both the text's audience and its proof. And the absent opponent who never appears and is therefore everywhere. We'll examine the gap between the text's literal surface, a monk advising a fighter, and what it's actually doing at the level of philosophical argument. And then we'll open the major themes one by one, following each as far as it goes into questions about attention, identity, mastery, and freedom that do not belong to the 17th century. They belong to anyone who has tried to do something difficult under pressure and discovered, at the critical moment, that the self trained for the difficulty was somehow in the difficulty's way. The central paradox of the text, and you'll want to carry this from the beginning, is that mastery means learning to empty skill of the self that learned it. You train until you can do something at the absolute limit of human capacity. And then the work is to become unaware that you trained. Not to forget the knowledge. The knowledge has to be there, embedded below the threshold of deliberation, automatic and available. But to stop being the person who is very good at this thing. to stop the watcher, the evaluator, the identity that monitors its own performance, and in monitoring, it introduces exactly the interference it is trying to prevent. That dissolution of the observer, that's what Takuan is writing toward across 3 letters, from 3 different angles, in a language that deliberately refuses to give instructions, because instructions would just be one more thing to watch yourself follow. There are a few terms worth holding before we go further. Mushin, often translated as no mind, but the translation is misleading if you read it as absence. Mushin is not emptiness in the sense of vacancy. It is a mind that has no fixed home, that doesn't settle on any object of attention and remain there. A mind in motion, through the situation, without being arrested by any element of it. The second term is Fudō, the immovable mind. This sounds like the opposite of mushin, and understanding why it is not the opposite, but rather the same condition described from the outside, is one of the key tasks of the series. The immovable mind is not a mind that refuses to move. It is a mind that cannot be displaced against its will, because it has no fixed position to be dislodged from. It moves constantly and completely, and in that constant, complete movement, nothing can catch it. The third term is ma, the interval, the space between things. In swordsmanship, ma is the physical distance between practitioners. It is also the temporal gap between perception and response, between the moment a situation declares itself and the moment the body answers. Takuan's entire text is, in a certain sense, a philosophy of what happens inside that gap. Or rather, what should not happen there, which is the deliberating self inserting a decision where the trained body already knows the answer. And the last term, touched lightly here and opened more fully later, is satori, sudden illumination. Not a reward for accumulated effort, not the end point of a gradual process, but a rupture. Zen does not trust the gradual. It trusts the break. The text is short and dense, and deceptively simple on its surface. 3 letters, each approaching the same central problem from a different angle, none of them resolving it, all of them making it more specific. It does not build toward a conclusion in the way a philosophical treatise builds. It circles. It returns. It pushes on the same point from different directions, and each time it pushes, the point goes a little deeper. By the end of the 3rd letter, you understand the problem with a precision that the first letter only gestures toward, but the problem itself remains unsolved, and that's not a failure of the text. It is the text's final and most honest move. Because the problem Takuan is describing cannot be solved by understanding it. Understanding is part of the problem. The mind that has understood mushin is a mind that now has something to understand, something to maintain, something to perform. The solution, if there is one, is not in the reading. It is somewhere on the other side of a practice long and rigorous enough that the reading eventually becomes unnecessary. What you will carry out of this series, if it works as intended, is not a set of conclusions but a quality of question. Where does your attention stop? What does it rest on when the pressure is highest? The outcome, the performance, the image of yourself performing well, the fear of performing badly. What would it mean to act from a place prior to all of that? From the part of you that already knows what to do and is waiting for the deliberating self to get out of the way. These are not questions with answers you can formulate, but they are questions you can take into practice, into whatever practice matters to you, wherever the stakes are high enough that the gap between preparation and action becomes visible. Takuan wrote for a swordsman. He was writing for everyone who has ever stood at the edge of what they know and felt the watcher appear. One new book every week. At least we try.